Harp's house. In your eardrum. Man, wherever you want me to be.
You're now listening
to Harp's house. Welcome everybody to Harp's house. I'm your host, Jonathan Harper, and we are back at it again with my relationship co-host, Dr. Allie Hicks. If this is your first time stopping by the podcast, this is her fourth time. Now, Dr. Allie and I have done a show on love or relationships, so make sure you dig in some old episodes on Harp's House to get some food for thought. But this episode is a little bit more heavy than some of our past episodes. As many of you know, ex-New England Patriot and star tight end Aaron Hernandez was found dead in his cell at about 3 a.m. the night of April 18th. Now, here's a little background on the story if you guys haven't caught up on it. He was serving a life sentence for a murder conviction, and just days ago he was acquitted of double murder charges. He died after what is being reported by prison officials as a suicide after he hung himself in his prison cell. Now, guards found Hernandez unresponsive in his cell at the correction center, according to prison spokesperson Christopher Fallon. And Fallon says Hernandez was in a single cell in a general population housing unit in a maximum security state prison. He hanged himself using a bed sheet that was attached to a window sill, according to Fallon. Now, Fallon says he was not aware of any suicide notes that were written by Hernandez at the time, and he stressed the investigation is ongoing. However, Jose Baez, he's Hernandez's lawyer, he released the following statement. He says the family and the legal team is shocked and surprised at the news of Aaron's death. He went on to say there were no conversations or correspondence from Aaron to his family or legal team that would have indicated anything like this was possible. He says Aaron was looking forward to the opportunity for a second chance to prove his innocence. Those who love and care for him are heartbroken and determined to find the truth surrounding this untimely death. We request the authorities conduct a transparent and thorough investigation. Now, Hernandez's cousin and former agent both are on the record for saying there's no chance that Aaron Hernandez took his own life. Now, again, Hernandez was recently acquitted of a double murder charge, and his camp says he was looking forward to appealing the murder charge that did stick, that landed him in prison without the possibility of parole. So the plot continues to thicken. Now, Dr. Allie, what are your first initial thoughts to all of that information?
I think initially when I thought about it and I heard that he had committed suicide, I was a little startled, and I was kind of thinking the same thing that I think a lot of people were thinking, which is he was just acquitted. His lawyer was going to go back and look at the original conviction and see if they could retry that. So what would make a man that was in a position that seemed to be really positive want to attempt and commit suicide? So my first thought was like, did someone do this to him? Was this revenge? And obviously we may actually never know. We may never really know what happened. But I will say that I think when it comes to suicide, one of the key factors in suicide and people who actually end up committing suicide is an increase in impulsivity. And so sometimes it seems as if there's no motivation for the suicide, but a part of it is because there's this large increase in people's impulsivity. And another thing that ends up happening before people attempt suicide is they have a large mood shift. Most of the time they shift from a more negative mood to a much more positive mood. And a part of that is because they've kind of decided what it is they're going to do. And so they end up feeling kind of this weight lifts off of them.
Gotcha. The whole story is so fascinating to me because he has a direct connection to causing, obviously, his family so much pain, the family of the man that he was, acquitted. Well, not acquitted, that he was convicted of taking his life. And he also leaves behind a young girl. It's just such a sad situation all the way around.
I think she's 3, yeah.
Right. And it's almost like Hernandez, if everything is true, from the court documents, it's almost like he tried to live a double life, like he almost tried to imitate art in that he was living like he was kind of like a mob character where he basically executed a guy, but then he was also playing football, which is so bizarre. So, I've heard the word thrown around a lot on social media, psychopath. Would that be considered accurate? Like, what does that mean in terms of clinical definition?
So when you're looking at someone that is, the term psychopath actually isn't in the DSM-4, so it's not, or DSM-5 rather. So there is no actual diagnosis of, psychopathy. But what it is, it would be an antisocial personality disorder. And when you're looking at your classic, quote unquote, I guess you would call it psychopath, that's a person that doesn't have empathy toward other people. That's a person that maybe has a history of violence, breaking the law, breaking the rules, not being concerned about what happens to other people, or like they may engage in risky behaviors like driving really fast while under the influence with other people in their car, and then they kind of think it's funny. So the primary thing that you see with someone who's considered a psychopath is somebody who doesn't feel empathy and pain when they harm or injure somebody else. Empathy is what we consider a pro-social behavior, because it's something that maintains the flow of society. If we didn't care about one another, we would end up hurting each other. And way back in the day, if you believe in evolution or not, we needed social groups to survive. If you didn't function in a group, you wouldn't make it. If you were that lone person, like running around the woods by yourself, you would die. And so we developed this sense of empathy in order to keep us bonded and keep us connected so we could survive. And so when you see individuals who don't have that, that's when we begin to label them with things like psychopath.
Gotcha. It's interesting that from the response that I've been seeing a lot on social media throughout the whole ordeal, like I've seen people say things like they feel bad for him and they're sympathetic, which I think is directly correlated and connected to his story and the trial being so public. And when I say that, we know so much about Aaron. We know that he played football for the New England Patriots. He went to a football powerhouse, which is the University of Florida. He was a Super Bowl champion. He was a handsome guy. What role do you think that plays in shaping the public's perception of a man that was convicted of a murder?
A huge part. It really makes me think back to O.J. Simpson, and how a lot of people have a hard time separating out what a person does from what a person has done, right? It's like if you're a superstar and then you commit a crime, some people are like, well, it's not that big a deal because he's such a good actor, or she's such a good writer, or he's such a good, athlete. And I think that we have a hard time parsing these things out because people are complicated, and we have we really want to put people in boxes. We want to say, you're a good person, you're a bad person. And I think a lot of it comes from the very black and white way that we've seen things in the past, like through media. The idea of cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, good guys and bad guys. But in all honesty, everyone's a little bit of both.
Right.
And Aaron may have done some very, distasteful, horrible, scary things, but I'm sure at some level he was a good dad. At some level. I'm sure at some level he was a decent friend, a good brother, a cute baby,
Right.
And we tend to have a hard time allowing somebody to be a murderer and be a good football player, because you can absolutely be both.
And I'm sure that that's why his legal team had so much of that made public, like you said, his growing up and all of the character stuff, because like you said, you try to convey that total picture versus just a man who killed another man.
Yeah, but we can't separate, because you can still be a great father and an amazing person and have committed a crime that requires that you go to jail.
Right.
You can be both. It's that's what jail is for. It's a place to keep people when they are a danger to society. Right. And if you're a person who's going around killing people that you don't like because they've done something to injure your ego or to offend you, then that makes us feel very unsafe, and you need to be somewhere where you're not around us. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're holistically a horrible person.
Right.
But it means that you have a penchant towards doing something that can destroy society.
And like you said, with the OJ trial, I think this, like you said, speaks to our love for celebrities in general. Just trying to, like you said, they're known for one thing, and it's hard for people to separate that from some of the things that they've done off the field or off camera.
Absolutely. People have such a hard time separating.
Right. So we're going to take our first break of this episode. And when we come back, I want to get your thoughts on comparing this murder case and then turn possible suicide to another. So we'll be right back here on Harp's House. We're back here at Harp's House, and we're talking about the unexpected death of ex-NFL star Aaron Hernandez. Now, earlier this week, a man in Cleveland, Ohio, shot and killed an elderly man for no reason and put it on Facebook Live. Now, the general feeling that I gathered when I was watching social media was people were like, man, this scumbag is despicable. How could he do such a thing? But I haven't seen the same type of reception for Hernandez when it was announced that he took his own life. Now, essentially both cases are pretty similar. It's a man killing another man, and then the killer ended up taking his own life. Why do you think the public looks at those two so differently?
I think we really touched on it in the last segment, in that people have this soft spot for celebrity. They look up to them so much, and they want to be like them so much that they forgive a lot of their sins. It's kind of the concept of being crazy when you're poor and eccentric when you're rich. Right? You have a guy on the sidewalk screaming about Jesus, and he's disheveled and he's homeless, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's a maniac. You get away from him." But then you have a really, really rich person saying the exact same things, maybe looking just as dirty, but because they have a lot of money, people are like, "Oh, but he's rich, so he's interesting." It's so intriguing that he thinks this way. And it's just this. We have this perception of people, and people don't like to be wrong. If I look up to a celebrity, and that celebrity does something that's distasteful, I'm hesitant to turn on that celebrity because I've looked up to them for so long that I don't want to be wrong. So I'd rather find a way to be right and actually do the wrong thing rather than admit that maybe this person wasn't everything I thought they were.
God, that's deep. That's deep. Say that one more time. That's the perception, right? And you don't want to look like you're wrong. That's real. That's deep.
Sometimes we'd rather be right than happy. That's what therapists say a lot. Right. And that we'd rather prove that we're right, even if the thing that we're right about is horrible. And so if we say that he's a great football player, which makes him a great person, and then he ends up murdering somebody, sometimes people double down. And they'll say, "You know what? But it must have been a circumstance." And they try to explain things away, as opposed to saying, "You know what? He did something that was really, really violent, really frightening, really terrifying." And then let's also talk about how we've become so desensitized to violence. Mm-hmm. Like, we're at a point in society where we watched Philando Castile bleed out in his car in front of his daughter.
Right.
And we almost didn't even bat an eyelash.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we're living in a society where we watch so much violent television that now we see actual violence, and we're just kind of like, "Oh man, that sucks." Yeah, this is it's terrifying. This is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I myself didn't watch that the Facebook death that happened recently. Like you said, I opted not to watch it because, like you said, we're just becoming so desensitized from reality versus art. It's unfortunate for the human race, really. And to stay along the lines with Aaron Hernandez, now ESPN personality Stephen A. Smith said all the families to just basically forget he existed totally and move on from him because he feels that Hernandez had zero remorse. What do you think about somebody saying just basically forget that he was ever here because he's just caused so much pain to so many families?
I think that's hard for some people. For some people, that's their coping skill, right? It's about ignoring and repressing memories. But it's not healthy to repress memories, and it's impossible for some people. Like, that's not how I coped. Mm-hmm. I couldn't just forget about it. It just wouldn't work. And I think that what's really important is people need to learn how they function in the world. And for each person who's involved in this case, although I'm sure there's hundreds of people who are directly impacted by this.
Absolutely. Friends and family and so on and so forth.
Spouses and the teammates. Like, there's so many people that are directly impacted, and each of them cope differently. Right. And each of them cope differently at different parts in their lives. And so what I really feel is that everyone under the sound of my voice needs to learn how they get through things. Because we all get through things differently. But at the end, we all have to face it and deal with it. Because if we don't deal with something and face it head on at a certain point, it's just going to sit and it's going to fester. And when something festers, it never gets better. A wound that's not healing does not heal by ignoring it. Right. You have to deal with it. You have to debride it. You have to go to the doctor and get it taken care of. And so I think that we don't deal with our mental and our psychological wounds the same way we deal with our physical wounds. And we end up trying to really push them away. And you can't forget Aaron, because he did something that impacted you. People who are involved with him are going to remember him forever. They just need to figure out how they deal with that memory.
Right. And that's real. Repeat that again. We feel what we deal with our mental wounds differently than we do our physical wounds.
Yeah, and people, we get a broken bone, and we instantly, because we're in so much physical pain, we instantly go to the doctor, and we get it, fixed, and pins, and all of these things done. But when we have a mental injury, we treat it like it's not important. Like, oh, just pray about it. Oh, just forget about it. Oh, move on. People say that. I have patients who come to me all the time. They're like, yeah, my family, they just tell me to move on, and I try to move on. I try to pray about it, but it doesn't go away. And so now you have two problems, where now the initial thing has happened. Something horrible has happened that has injured you psychically. And then secondarily, now you're judging yourself because everyone's telling you to get over it, and you can't get over it because that's not how you work. Right? Not everyone's going to just get over a broken leg. If you had a broken leg and your bone was sticking out and someone told you just to walk it off,
Right.
you would think that they were ridiculous. Right. And that's the same thing. You can't just tell someone to forget. You can't just tell someone to move on. They have to go get, some people need to go get treatment.
I think that's a societal thing, though.
Almost everyone does.
Yeah, it's a societal thing because, like you said, when you get injured physically, you go to the doctor, you have physical therapy, you can take time off from work. But when you have emotional trauma, society generally just wants you to get past it, get back to work, and just keep chugging along.
Mm-hmm. And I think that a part of that is because society, we're all afraid of that quiet moment right before you go to bed when things get very real for you. Mm-hmm. When all those thoughts and all the things you're guilty about and all the mistakes that you've made, all those things come creeping up. And it's not always before people go to bed, but there's always a moment where those thoughts come creeping in. And we like to think that we can just ignore it and we can just move on and we can just forget about it. And so we try to tell other people to do that, but that's just not how it works. The more you ignore it, the worse it gets. You have to dive in, especially with trauma. So especially if you're involved in a case, something like with the Aaron Hernandez case where you've been a victim of violent crime or a family member has been a victim of violent crime, you may have PTSD. You may be experiencing trauma. And the number one treatment for trauma, the first thing you're going to do when you come into your therapist is you're going to sit down and you're going to talk in great detail about the things that frighten you. Right. That's one of the ways that you deal with it, because the more you talk about it, the less frightening it becomes. The more you talk about it, the more your brain is prepared to help you process the trauma, to help you problem solve through it. But the less you talk about it, the scarier it gets. With my trauma clients, I liken it to a 1970s monster movie. And how you're really scared when you see the shadow of the monster, right? And you hear a growl or something. But then at the end of the movie, you finally actually see the monster and you realize it's just some guy in a really cheap suit with a zipper hanging out and you see wires all over it and you realize it's not as scary as it seemed. That's what trauma is for a lot of people, is that you ignore it and you ignore it and you ignore it and you see specters and ghosts of this trauma and it frightens you. But then the minute you actually sit down and you actually look it in its face, you realize how strong you actually are, and you realize you can get through it. And you might need support from family members, from friends, from a therapist, from a psychiatrist, but you can get through it.
Gotcha. We're going to take another quick time out here on Harp's House, and when we come back, we're going to dive into how prison and bad decisions affect the loved ones of the people who actually go to prison. So we're going to be right back here on Harp's House with Dr. Ali. We'll be right back. We're back here at Harp's House. I'm your host, Jonathan Harper, with my trusted sidekick, Dr. Ali Hicks.
Hey.
And we're talking about Aaron Hernandez. Now, Dr. Ali, I'm going to ask you a series of questions to see how loved ones should handle, some various situations from your medical opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So how should a single parent of a child in a situation like this talk about, what happened to their dad?
See, I think it's a hard one, but it's not at the same time. I always believe that honesty is important, and I think that we underestimate children a lot. We feel like kids can't handle the truth, and we have to tell them oh, Daddy's in an adult daycare.
Right.
He's in a place.
He's
and
away.
I think that all that
Yeah.
he's playing with people like him.
Right.
I think that what it does is it ends up creating more anxiety for kids. Because, for example, people always tell their kids, when people die, they say, he's just sleeping.
Right.
And what it does is it actually will make a kid scared to sleep.
Yeah.
It's so am I going to go to sleep and never wake up? Is he awake yet? Oh, he never woke up? I don't want that to happen to me.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to be 100% honest with your kids, even if they're 2, even if they're 1, telling them, Daddy made a bad decision. And when you make bad decisions, then you go to this place.
And I've even heard of kids developing a resentment towards their parents and the family members for lying to them, because, like you said, we underestimate the intelligence level of kids. We think they're naive and don't know anything, when in actuality, they know exactly what's going on a lot of the time.
They know more of what's going on than we do. You've heard about the First 5 campaign.
What's that? Go ahead.
Well, basically, children learn 75% of the things that they're ever going to know in their life in the first 7 years of living.
Okay.
And you learn most of the things that you're ever going to know about interpersonal relationships when you can't talk. So when you're not talking, what you're actually doing is all you're doing is absorbing things around you. So if your parents are beating each other, you're taking that in as a 2-year-old, as a 1-year-old, as a 6-month-old. You're learning how people relate to one another. And so those are actually the most important times. People make them the least important, like, oh, she won't remember it. No, she might not cognitively remember it, but actually kids remember it in their bodies. They have a body memory, this muscle memory. Like, when you sit there and you shoot over and over again, like you do like 100, Kobe would do like, 1,000 free throws every day.
Yep.
Because he wanted to build muscle memory.
Right.
And so what children are doing is they're building muscle memory. They're building this memory that is so ingrained in them that they can't ever forget it. And so that's why it's so important not to lie to them, because it becomes a part of their character. Mm-hmm. Because it's such a deep part of them. And so whenever I hear a parent saying, oh, it's not a big deal, I'll just tell him that his dad is, here and there. No, I always believe in telling kids the truth. You just figure out how your kid learns and how your kid understands things, and you try to help them understand it. But you just tell them what it is, and then let them ask questions. Like, what is jail? Jail is a place for people who do bad things in society and need to be put in a place away from the rest of us. Well, why is he there? Because he hurt somebody. How did he hurt somebody? He got a gun and shot them, and that's not nice, and that hurts people. And I know on television you see that people do that, but that's not real. And in real life, you can't do those types of things. You just have to answer the questions the way that they ask them.
The fascinating part of that, like I was wincing when you were saying that, and I don't even have a child. So I think a lot of times it hurts the parent more to verbalize that to their child than it does the child receiving that message.
Yes, and we need to stop being so selfish with our kids. We need to understand that just because we have a problem with something doesn't mean our kids do. For example, I'm petrified of bugs, right? But I wasn't always scared of bugs. When I was very small, I used to pick up bugs and collect them, and I was obsessed with bugs. But my mom screamed at a bug once, and ever since then, I can't touch bugs. Because my mother, your mother and your father are the most important people in your life. Whoever is your caregiver is the person who's responsible for your entire existence, because at 2, you can't do anything for yourself. And so if your parent is showing you that they're scared to talk about something, you're going to be scared to talk about something. Kids reflect who they're around. And so if you tell your kids straight up, like, this is what's happening, right, and I know it's scary, but I'm going to teach you how to deal with scary things, because life can be scary. Right. And I'm going to learn how to deal with scary things so that you can learn how to deal with scary things. Because daddy shooting somebody is a very scary thing. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm lonely. I feel a little guilty. I feel resentment. Like, these are all the feelings that come up for me, and they're normal. Right. And that's how your kids learn how to cope with the world, and that's how they learn to cope in an effective way, so they're not doing drugs or necessarily drinking or engaging in violence. Like, we have to teach them how to deal with the world in a way that's like pro-social and positive, and it'll keep them out of jail.
Right. And I had a few other questions, but I guess they're all centered around being honest with the child or a family member. Because, for instance, I had, how do you talk to a young child about a family member or their parent going to jail, for instance, for 2 years versus 30. But like you said, I guess it's all about honesty in the front end, so you don't have to lie and make it something more. Because like you said, over time, the child might develop a resentment towards you for not telling them the truth.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. I think honesty is the best policy. So that's what they taught us when we were kids, and I still believe it.
Now, Dr. Ali, once again, for our listeners, we're talking about suicide. What would be some of the words of advice that you would give to a listener who might be suicidal, or for someone who they think in their immediate circle, like a friend or family, that may be going through some tough times? What are some of the warning signs that you would give out?
So, like I said earlier, one major warning sign is obviously a decreased mood. So if you have somebody who's sad, who's constantly tearful, we refer to as like having a low mood or a dysphoric mood, then like that's one thing. And then if they're speaking about being suicidal, obviously that's another thing. If they're saying things like, I don't want to be here anymore, I wish I was dead, I wish I wasn't around, you'd be better off without me. These are what we refer to as nihilistic comments. And so you want to be on the lookout for things like that. Then there's things like parasuicidal behavior. There's cutting, people who cut, people who may overdose. And so you want to look out for actual behaviors. And then you also look out for changes in behavior. So if someone gone from happy to very sad quickly, you want to really look into getting them some treatment. Or has someone even gone from being really sad to being really happy all of a sudden? Because that's something you also need to look into, because that shift is something that you tend to see before someone actually completes a suicide. And then increases in impulsivity. So maybe the person has always been consistent at work, and now they're randomly just taking trips to Vegas for no reason. And they're spending lots of money, or they're giving all their clothes away. So these are things you want to look for. And and then obviously ask them, be honest, say, are you, because I think we're so scared to talk about suicide. Mm-hmm. Even as a clinician, when I first started out, I was petrified. Because whenever you meet with a client, you have to ask them about suicide. Especially in your first few meetings. Mm-hmm. And I would be petrified because I was like, but am I giving them the idea? And that's ludicrous.
Right.
People think about it all the time.
Right.
You're not teaching them something that they didn't know. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So don't think that you're like giving them the idea like, oh, maybe I will commit suicide. Because like if you're so low and you've been feeling really bad for a long time, then it's probably something you've already thought about.
Right.
And another thing that we see in people who commit an attempt suicide is hopelessness, mm-hmm. which is this feeling like things will never change and things will never get better, which is something I suspected with the Aaron Hernandez case, and that he felt like maybe one thing changed, but he's still in the same situation, and he's locked and he's trapped. So I've had a lot of my patients express to me that they feel like they're in the bottom of a pit, and they can't see anything but the walls of the pit, and they feel totally trapped in this pit of despair. And when you hear people talking like that, that's when you want to reach out to them and request that they go to a therapist. And if they're actively saying, I'm going to commit suicide, you need to call 911. Hands down, call 911 and let them know, this is a suicide attempt. Someone is, make it clear on the phone so that they know to send a pet team as opposed to sending police. Because they do have different teams, and different states are different. But in California, especially in Los Angeles, we do have a pet team here that will respond to psychological emergencies, and then they'll be hospitalized, or they'll at least be assessed for hospitalization. And so that's like if someone's actively suicidal. If someone's kind of passively suicidal and they're just really down, then you can even call organizations like NAMI, N-A-M-I, the National Association of Mental Illness.
Shout out to NAMI. I actually did a story with them when I was a reporter at KSPR, and I actually won an award. It was right after, it was like you said, it was based on mental health and awareness with suicidal thoughts and things like that, right after the untimely death of Robin Williams. So I'm very familiar with that story, and like you said, that organization. Mm-hmm. Not to toot my own horn, but toot, because I did receive an award, but continue.
Yeah, and then there's suicide hotlines everywhere. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 800-273-8255.
Right.
That's 800-273-8255. And so these are people that people can call and talk to 24 hours a day. They can reach out if they're really feeling down, and these people are trained and they know exactly what to do if someone's talking about this, because it can be so frightening when you have a loved one that is talking like that.
Yeah,
the last thing you want is for them to attempt to commit suicide.
Yeah, I met with some of those operators, and like you said, they talk through a lot of heavy issues with people who call in when they're really feeling down on their luck. So it's a very valuable resource. So we've gone over a lot of really important information on this episode that hits a lot of really hard hitting pieces of information. So be sure to send this episode to your friends or family or anyone else you know that might be dealing with suicide or trouble in their relationship to get them in a better place. Now, Dr. Allie, give my listeners all your social media information so they can keep up with you and reach out to you.
Perfect. On Instagram, it is Allison Hicks. That is ALLYCINHICKS. That is also on Twitter. And you can find me at my website at Dr. Allie Hicks. So DRALLYHICKS.com.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks everyone for tuning in to a special edition of Harp's House about the tragic and untimely death of 27-year-old former NFL star Aaron Hernandez. But again, be sure to subscribe to Harp's House in your podcast section in iTunes or in the Google Play Store. Also follow me on Instagram and Twitter. That's I am Harper. That's I AMHARPER, and check out the website for old episodes and more information on Harp's House. That's harpshouse.com. And feel free to email me at harpshouse1, tongue twister, email me at harpshouse1@gmail with any comments, suggestions, concerns. Your feedback is always greatly appreciated. Again, thanks again for finding the time in your day or your night to stop by Harp's House. God bless. We out.